Hi guys, this is Dr. Manjunath Chennapgod from Anveshana Academy, Bangalore, India. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Dear students, in the previous class we discussed about what is control volume, what are the application of control volume, what are the best examples for control volume. In detail we have discussed in the previous class. Okay, dear students, in today's class I am going to discuss about properties of a thermodynamic system. So today's class I am going to discuss about properties of a thermodynamic system. So what is that we will study here now. So thermodynamic properties of a system. Dear students, what I will do, I will try to explain you the properties of a system. Okay, so what is this now? The meaning of property is nothing but any characteristics of a system is called a property. That means what? You can take any system, it is going to have a characteristics. That characteristic may be anything else. That characteristics we can call it as a property. So property is defined, a property of system is defined as any characteristics of a system is known to be a property. Some properties we can list here. Some basic or similar familiar properties we can list here now. What are those? You can take a pressure, you can take a temperature, you can take a volume, and you can take a mass. These are some familiar properties when it comes to a system. Okay, what is property? Property is nothing but any characteristics of a system is known to be property. Okay, what is that system now? That you can see now. What is system? What are the different types of systems? Okay, so what are the examples for the different type of systems? In detail we have discussed in the previous class, dear students. If you want to know what is system and what are the different types of system, you can go back and you can see my previous videos. You can get the complete knowledge of different types of systems. Okay, now dear students, I will take a system here now. So assume that this is a system. I will mark here now. This is a system. Okay, assume that I am going to take a hot water into the container. Hot water, you can take it here now. So then system is nothing but what? We know already. System is nothing but what? System is a fixed region in a space which is considered for the thermodynamic study. System is nothing but a certain quantity of matter in a region which is considered for the thermodynamic analysis. That is known to be system. That system is surrounded by a layer. That layer we can call it the system boundary. Okay, that system boundary surrounds the certain quantity of matter. That matter may be anything else. You can take liquid or you can take gas or anything you can take. But in this example I have taken hot water. Dear students, there is a system. That system having hot water. Then that system having some properties in itself. What are the properties now? When I am telling it is a hot water, right? Definitely there is a temperature. That again, if that hot water having temperature, right? That means what? If it is having heat, that means what? It is going to have some amount of heat inside it. That heat is nothing but what? That heat can be represented with help of what? Temperature. That means temperature is also one characteristics. That is nothing but what? Property of a system. Second, when there is a heat, right? When there is a temperature in the water, definitely there will be pressure. Again, that pressure is nothing but what? It's a characteristic or a property of a system. Okay, when I'm going to consider certain quantity of matter, right? Certain quantity, that means what? It is going to have certain quantity means what? In terms of mass. That is nothing, that's also kind of property or characteristic of a system. When that mass is there, right? That mass is going to have some volume. That volume we can call it as a property of a system or a characteristics of a system. These all are what you can take when you are going to consider a system. When you are going to consider a system, that system is going to have different characteristics. Those different characteristics we can call it as a properties of a system. So what is property of a system? Any characteristics of a system is called as a property. Okay, fine. Now understood, hope you understood what is property. Now I will move towards next. When it comes to property of system, right, there may be some other properties are also there. Those are viscosity, thermal conductivity, modulus of elasticity, thermal expansion, electricity, electrical resistivity, velocity and elevation. These are different properties are there, but those properties we will discuss in upcoming classes in detail. But now I will stick on only to some important basic properties of a system. Okay, now I have considered this as a system. Okay, it is going to have some basic or similar properties, that may be mass, that may be temperature, that may be pressure, that may be volume, or that may be some other properties also. Okay, but when you are going to consider a system, right, now assume that, dear students, I have taken the hot gases or hot water. That hot water I will fill into this container. Assume that this is a cube is there. What I will do, I am going to fill that hot water into this container. Okay, hot water into this container. Now assume that this container, just a minute. Okay, assume that this cube going to have a hot water inside it. Now when it comes to hot water in a container, right, definitely it is going to have some basic properties. Those basic properties are nothing but what? Either it may be pressure or temperature, volume or mass, you can take. Okay, fine. But here, dear students, certain quantity of water have taken. That certain quantity of water is nothing but what? Certain quantity, that is nothing but what? Mass 1 kg. Okay, when you are going to consider 1 kg of hot water into the cubic container, definitely it is going to have a volume. That volume I will take it here, dear students. Example, 1 meter cube. Assume that I have taken a container. In that container I am going to fill hot water. That hot water having mass is 1 kg, example, and volume is 1 meter cube. These are the properties, right? Now what I will do, dear students, now in this container, exactly 50% I will divide. That means what? In the same container I am going to put in a partition wall. That means what? I will take a thin plate of copper or aluminum. I will going to insert in between it, exactly at the center. That means what? Half of the mass of water will come at this side. That is 1/2. That is nothing but what? Next half mass will come at the other side. That means what? Mass is divided into two parts here. Now you can call it as a left part, and we can call it as a right part. Some portion of water gets collected at right side, some portion of water is going to collect at the another side, that is left side. That means what? Mass is divided. That means what? Mass, 1 kg of mass, that is 1 kg of mass is divided into two parts. That half force at one left side, then another half portion will be at right side, dear students. Now when we are going to divide, right, then what happens now? Mass, when we are going to divide, right, when we are going to divide mass into two parts, right, then volume also is going to part into two parts. That means what? Certain quantities, 50% of volume is going to occupied at right side, 50% of volume is going to occupied at right side. If you divide mass, the volume is splitted into two parts. That means what? That volume is dependent on the mass. If once you mass divided into two parts, the volume is also divided into two parts. If that volume is dependent on the mass, then we are going to get one properties. That property we can call it as a extensive properties, dear students. If any property you can take, property depends on mass, that property we can call it as a extensive properties. But this is one property, volume we have taken. Now I will take one more thing, pressure I will take it now. You can take a pressure, you can measure the pressure at left side, you can measure pressure at right side, but pressure remains same. But it is not at all even though you are dividing mass into two parts, the pressure remains same at left side and right side. If the pressure remains same, or if the property, if it is not at all dependent on the mass, that property we can call it as a intensive property. That property, if it is not at all dependent on the mass, that property we can call it as a intensive property. What is extensive property? Extensive properties are properties those dependent on the mass, the property which are dependent on the mass, whereas the properties they are not at all dependent on the mass, those we can call it as a intensive properties. How it is, that we can see here now, dear students. Okay, so now to understand better, I will take an example and I will try to explain you here now. Okay, fine. Okay, now I have taken a container. Assume that, dear students, it's a cube. Okay, now I will take a front view of this container. and this container going to have, when I'm going to consider hot water, right, inside it, right, that is itself, it is going to have some basic properties. What are those? Mass it is going to have, volume it is going to have, temperature it is going to have, pressure it is going to have, and density it's also going to have. Dear students, what I'm doing here now I will divide this container I will divide, okay, that is cubic container. I am going to divide, or else I am going to put in a partition wall. This dotted line, it indicates what? Partition line. That partition line you can call, or partition wall also we can call, or a thin plate. What I'm doing, at this exact center I'm going to insert. That means what? Mass is divided into two parts. Half of the mass will come at left side, and half of the mass will come at right side. That means what? When we are going to divide into two parts, the mass is split into two parts. One thing, if the mass is split into two parts, volume, what will happen now? 50% of volume is going to occupy at left side, 50% of volume of hot water is going to occupy at right side. That means what? Volume and mass, they are going to dependent on the mass. Those properties we can call it as a extensive properties. What are the extensive properties? Extensive properties are the properties of the system. They are dependent on the mass. Those property we can call it some extensive properties. Okay, when it comes to another properties, dear students, we can take now. Next, we can take a temperature. When we are going to put a thermometer, right? When we are going to put a thermometer at right side and left side, temperature remains same. If it is at 30 degrees Celsius, here also it will be 30 degrees Celsius. The temperature remains same. That means the temperature is not at all dependent on the mass, because you are splitted mass into two parts here now. But the temperature is not at all dependent on the mass. That property we can call it some intensive properties. One thing, you can take one more properties. Pressure. When you are going to take a pressure, right, when you are going to divide into two parts, mass we are divided, right, that when you divided into two parts, then you can take a manometer and you check the pressure. Pressure at left side remains same, pressure at right side remains same. That means what? Pressure is not at all changing, pressure remains constant. That means that pressure is not at all dependent on the mass. That property we can call it as an intensive property. Next, we can take a density. Again, density is also not at all dependent on the mass. If it is not at all dependent on the mass, that we can call it as an intensive properties. Okay, so dear students, for your understanding, we can take it here in a hot pot. When you are doing rice cooker, right, you can take certain quantity of matter. You just to put, there are some properties, basic property. Mass will be there, volume will be there, temperature, pressure, density will be there. When we are going to put a small portion, a partition wall in between, right, thin plate, half side. That means what? Some properties they are dependent on the mass, but some properties they are not at all dependent on the mass. The properties which are dependent on the mass, those properties we can call as extensive properties. The properties which are not at all dependent on the mass, those properties we can call it as an intensive property. Okay, fine. Now, okay, so definition you can note down, dear students. The properties which are dependent on the mass, which are independent on the mass, we can call it as an intensive property. Intensive, independent, or they are not at all dependent on the mass. Those properties, intensive properties. Extensive properties are nothing but what? The properties which are dependent on the mass of the system. That is known to be extensive properties. Examples for intensive properties, dear students: temperature. This temperature, whether we are going to change mass or whatever it may be in the container in the system, the temperature will not at all change. That means it's remain constant. That is nothing but what? Intensive property. You can take a pressure, you can take a density, you can take a specific volume. Okay, these all are what? Intensive properties. Intensive properties are temperature, pressure, density, specific volume, viscosity, refractive index, specific heat capacity, thermal conductivity, electrical conductivity, magnetic permeability. These all are what? Intensive properties. They are not at all dependent on the mass. When it comes to extensive properties, the properties which are dependent on the mass, that is nothing but what? Volume, mass, energy, enthalpy, entropy, momentum, number of moles, electrical charge, magnetic moment, moment of inertia. These all are what? Extensive properties. Okay, so dear students, we understood now what is intensive and extensive properties. As I told dear students, when it comes to system, it is not only restricted to only intensive and extensive properties, but other properties also there in the are there for that particular thermodynamic system. Those properties we can list physical properties, chemical property, thermal property, and we can list mechanical properties. But in thermodynamic system, that in today class we are going to discuss only on intensive and extensive properties. Okay, when it comes to thermodynamic systems, we are studying in this particular class only two properties, that is intensive and extensive properties. Fine. Now, what are the examples for intensive property? Dear students, you can list 10 number of intensive properties. You can take independent on mass, independent on mass. Examples: pressure you can take, temperature you can take, density, specific volume, specific enthalpy. These all properties are what? Intensive properties. The properties, they are dependent on mass. Dependent on mass, those properties we can call as extensive properties. What are the examples for extensive properties? That you can see here, dear students: mass, volume, energy, enthalpy, entropy, momentum, number of moles, heat capacity. These all are what? Extensive properties. Whether you change mass or not, but the properties remain same in the system. They are not at all dependent on the mass. Those properties we can call as extensive properties. Fine. Now, okay, dear students, hope you understood. Then we can convert extensive property into intensive property also. Okay, fine. So these all are what? Intensive property. They are not at all dependent on the mass. That already I discussed, dear students. Okay, hope you understood today's class. That is what is intensive property, what is extensive property, and what is thermodynamic property of a system. That you understood. Hope you understood well. Dear students, here I request you, please do subscribe my channel, share to your friends. Okay, and if you like my videos, really put some comments into a comment box. Okay, thank you.